I was born in Montgomery, Alabama. I was born on Mill Street. Um, when I was born, first of all, the people tried to get my mother to abort me. But then I was born a 6.5 month baby. And the midwife lived across the street from me. And she said, and it was her birthday. So she said, when I get back from my party, she'll be dead. But my grandmama fed me with the medicine dropper. And so then we did really have the neighborhood as a village. And so my grandmother and all the people around supported and nurtured me back to this. So I went from a medicine drop to all I could eat. So that I enjoyed my childhood. Um, we grew up in a neighborhood that was very diverse in terms of incomes and personalities. Um, the lady on the corner from me wrote a book, See How They Run, and it was made into a movie. And down from her was the guy that was on the railroad, and then across the street in front was a teacher, and next door was the midwife and her husband that was on the railroad. On the other corner was a man that raced horses. He would travel every year. That was a season, and I forget what they call him, but he rode behind the horse and they raced. And then we had some really colorful people that we could predict them. And every Friday we'd look forward to Mr. Rat being drunk coming up the street. And so I've said all that to say there was a lot of color, and there were a lot of different people in uh, vocations, etc. But it was very nurturing childhood. We were in the church from every time I can remember, and part of my activism was kind of injected by what we learned at church and the people that we grew up in the Amy Zion Church, and they were very much involved. Reverend Solomon Say was our pastor, but also in school we were taught to care for our people, and we had Black History Week, but we were taught about our people and our struggle every day. So we had that from the beginning. So then when I got to be 12 years old, I went to, I joined the youth council of the NAACP. And I think that people often ask me why Ms. Parks asked for me to be a part. But my sister and I were in everything. So every tea, every talent show, everything, we were involved in it. And my grandmother's brother worked with E.D. Nixon, sleeping car porters, and we were in and out Mr. Nixon's house. So we heard about these stories all of our lives. And so when I was asked to join the NAACP Youth Council, I did. Well, I tell everyone that if we had 12 people, we met in Mrs. Parks' apartment for the most part, but I tell everybody that if we had 12 people at the meeting, it was an overflow crowd. And people were not so anxious to be a part of the NAACP. In fact, it was dangerous to be a part of that. So when I joined, the guy that was the president of the youth council was drafted in the army, and so one of my friends was elected president, and then they just nominated me to be vice president. I just took it. I was happy to do that. I think she asked my grandmother if I could be in. I'm not sure. I mean, for real, for real. But that was my assumption, and it was because my grandmother, as brother, was involved with Nixon. And so, then, and if you go to my house where I was born, it's just a few blocks away from Mrs. Parks. And then we walked to everything, and the churches were up there and everything. So, as I say, My sister and I were involved in everything. So then, everything that came around and came about, we were also a part of the youth council of the Federated Women's Clubs. So I'm saying that all the organizations around at that time, we were involved in it. In fact, people would say, we're going to invite the Doja girls. My maiden name is Doja. I assume that it was my grandmother's brother. As I say, there were a lot of influences, but being a part of the youth council, for some reason, she asked me to accompany her with trips around the state. I cannot tell you why. At one meeting, and nobody can dispute it, but it's the truth, she said that I was one of her favorites. So being in the NAACP, etc., then we were asked to attend the Highlander Folk School. Mrs. Parks was passionate about voter registration and that our people become educated. And so, as a part of that, we then went about knocking door to door to ask people if they would go down to try to register to vote. So we were engaged in that. And we kind of understood because then we understood because we had citizenship education. So as young people, we understood the role of the mayor, the county commission, the state representative, and so forth. And we understood what was going on with them. In that space of time, Jeremiah Reed case was on, and they talked about that. And then there was the Emmett Till. And we learned about what was going on with people, women on the buses. And I think people need to really think about who rode the buses. It was women and students for the most part. And in fact, the wheel and wheel in this whole thing they call the civil rights movement is largely women and students. Well, basically, I followed the lead of the president. um, and you can imagine at 12, um, it was from my recollection, it was more of a title, but also that may be the reason why I was traveling with Mrs. Parks, because I was the vice president. I really don't recall. Um, I know Mrs. Parks would go in and she talked to many people. I don't recall actually what happened, but I do remember one of the drivers was a man named Mr. Upshaw, and he was a very colorful driver. But no, I do not remember where we went. Uh, it was outside of Montgomery, kind of around the state. But I do remember um, us going to the state convention of the NAACP. It was held in Birmingham, Alabama, and I do remember a lady named Miss Ruby Hurley being the guest speaker, and she was a very powerful speaker. I cannot recall what she talked about, but I was moved by
But it
her.
resonated with you.
Well, let me go back because as I told you, everything that happened around town, my sister and I were involved in it. In fact, after they banned the NAACP, and we kept working, meeting with Mrs. Parks at her house about different things, largely voter registration and that like, and the things she was going through um, with the mass meetings, etc. And we often stopped by um, the department store, Montgomery Fair, where she worked prior to her arrest, and a little bit after. I don't remember. It was just a couple of months there. But after her arrest, of course, we were interested in stopping by. In 1955, but in 1958, I was asked to go to Washington for the Youth March for Integration that Harry Belafonte had. And I remember that very well. I was very impressed with that. That was 58. And then 59, 60 was the student movement for Alabama State. I attended school at the laboratory school on the campus of Alabama State. So we naturally thought that we were part of that also. So we joined them. We turned out the classes at the high school and joined the college students. So that took me to 60. And so in 1961, when the Freedom Riders came, then we were part of the group that met the Freedom Riders. And so we were just enthralled with them. I mean, we were just enamored. We just thought the world of the Freedom Riders. And we attended the meetings at the Harris House with them. And I have one picture of that you can have. I'll give shit to you. So following that, I attended college at Southern University. And because of the Freedom Riders and all that talking then, I immediately joined the core people with the sittings there. We were marching to the jail and so forth. And so they told us to, whatever happened, hold hands, close your eyes, and keep singing. So I did. And so when I looked up, they started throwing tear gas. When I looked up, I heard this running. And I opened my eyes, everybody was running up the hill. And I ran and stumbled, and that's when they threw the tear gas in my chest, and I had to go to the infirmary. And so the president then said that he dismissed the school and said that if we got a letter to come back, otherwise don't come back. So essentially I was expelled from there and came home to Montgomery. And my dad came from Atlanta and told my mother that he was taking me to Atlanta. And he got me over there, I wouldn't be involved in that mess. So I went to Atlanta and I went to immediately look for a lady named Ruby Doris Smith, who was here on the Freedom Rise. And she was in school at Spelman at the time. And so I went looking for her. The very first person that I met was a fellow named Julian Bond and Bob Mance. So the very first day that I was there, I immediately got involved in the mess. So I became a part of the Student on Appeals for Human Rights and later some of the early SNCC stuff, but also SCLC. I kind of dealt with all of them. All of this without my dad knowing what I was doing because I enrolled in Clark College at the time. And so we had voter registration drives, and there were little city in Minor. I don't know why Atlanta wants to claim that they were the birthplace of the civil rights movement. And let me say for the record, they were not. The birth of the modern civil rights movement was in Montgomery, Alabama in 55. We were interacting with SCLC and that I got involved with voter registration there and became a deputy registrar in Atlanta. So so that was what happened there. And then I was got the attention of a lady named Rosetta Gardner, who was part of the National Board of the YMCA, and they engaged college students. We had panels and discussions about everything, mostly around civil rights and those activities and the struggles and that. And so when I graduated college, I was sent by the National Board of YMCA to Chicago to become a part of what Triple CO that was headed by a man named Al Raby that you seldom hear about. But he was the man who asked Dr. King to come to Chicago to deal with those issues. So then the following summer, they sent me back to Chicago to work with SCLC and the whole open housing campaign. So that's how I got to Chicago with that. So at the culmination of the summer program, I was asked to speak at the farewell luncheon. So I got up there at the luncheon and I said, the nerve of the National Board of YMCA to bring me all the way from Alabama to talk about open housing when there's no open housing in Selma or Montgomery. So I got the attention of a lady named Dorothy Height. So she sat me down and she said, young lady, what do you want to do? I said, I want to work with women. And I want to be involved with women. And she said, well, I think I have a position for you. I said, you do? She said, yes, I'll be in touch with you. They called me and asked me to come to New York. And I came and I became part of her staff and was the Southern representative for the National Council of Negro Women. So through the years, we worked with them and other things happened and so forth. But I was always tapped to do things. And I tell everybody, all my young people today, that what propels you is productivity. So if you produce, um, you will gain the attention, do your job well, and produce, then you'll be asked to do. So I never applied for any job. Um, so working with Dorothy Height, I worked throughout the South. Working with Dorothy Height, we were engaged with all of the national women organizations, Black women and Jewish women. And so we did largely Mississippi, but also South Carolina and Georgia. And so, but because the heads of the national women's organizations, all of the sororities and church women and so forth, I got to know a whole network of women around the country. And so when that project was over, um, I was tapped to be a Ford Fellow, and I worked in rural areas, talking about rural health issues with women. So I kept the women thing going, but I also traveled all over doing that. And so I got the attention somehow that the group called the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, they work with rural farmers in the 13 southern states. So that was another group of people that I had that I could contact. And that I got the attention of a fella in Montgomery that you may know. His name is Joe Reed. And he asked me to run his campaign for city council. So when we finished that and he won, he asked me to attend a meeting with him with a little known farmer named Jimmy Carter. And so I was very impressed with him, and I told Dr. Reed, I said, he's going to be president. He said, no, I'm for him. I said, no, he's going to be president. So they, because I was the only one really asking the man any questions. So he wanted to know who I was. And so um, one of the graduates of Clark, named Ben Brown, contacted me and asked me to put together a meeting for Jimmy Carter, and they wanted 50 people, and I got 150 people there. So then I was on the radar, so they asked me to come work. So that's how that all happened. Scary. It was scary. You know, I, along with later became Alderman Dorothy Tillman and her friend, we were responsible for recruiting people to come to the mass meetings so that they would go to the marches. Well, when we go out to march, those people were ruthless. I mean, they threw half of the sidewalk down for us. And I used to say all the time, look, if I'm going to march, don't put me with any white people. Because if you were with a black and a white, they were surely to attack you. And then we would tried to recruit the strongest, person to walk with us. And in the meetings, when we recruited people, then they had to go through the nonviolent training workshops. And I have a fun story about that, but I don't listen. This guy came to the church, and they tell you, take out all your, if you have any weapons. At that time, it was a knife. Um, and this is a nonviolent movement, and then I'm not nonviolent. This is this guy. He's a big, tall guy, and I said, I'm marching with him. So we went on the march. Those people started throwing, and I think this is the march where Dr. King said was the scariest and the most violent thing, and it was. And they threw big, I used to call it counter draft, huge bottles, wasn't huge, but big bottles through the lines and at us. And then they threw rocks and bricks and threw them over their marches. Well, we were instructed for the guys to walk on the outside of us. So if a missile came, they could protect the women. And if it got rough, then we laid down where the guys were to lay on top of us. So we went dancing along, and it got real bad and scary. And the guy knocked me down and got on top of me. And I was saying, get up, get up, get up, get up, get up. It's called people to get up. That guy was really afraid, and he had an accident, and they had to take him in the bed with him. But I said, well, I guess I won't be recruiting the big and the tall. So, but it was scary, and they set cars on fire and all of that. And the other thing was that the police that were marching beside us and protecting us would leave the line, go up on the porch and eat watermelon with their cousins or whoever. It was just, we just had to trust in the Lord, that's all. And that's what we had faith, and we kept going. But Chicago was rough, and it was rough every day that we went out to Engage Park. And the people on the side, they had a song they would sing, and they said, I wish I were an Alabama trooper. That is what I really like to be. For if I was an Alabama trooper, I could kill legally. And I was shocked at that. I mean, because as you say, the assumption was that people we called it the North, but in the West, the Midwest, were not like the Southerns. But that proved not to be so true. Well, he came to the meeting. He turned the chair around. He rolled up his sleeve and was close in with the people. So he had a connection, and he had a warmth that stuck with me. And prior to that, now I don't know how or why Joe Reed asked me that. Prior to that, we were kind of anti uh, politicians, police, and the media. We perceived to be our enemies at that time. And I will tell you, at that time, well, I was 30 then, but we used to say we didn't trust anybody over 30 years old. I was not a part of the everyday staff of any of those organizations. I always worked with organizations based on what they were doing that I wanted to be a part of. So, with SCLC, even, I was involved more with the younger people. I was not part of the executive staff meetings of this. If there was a project, like with SCLC, I worked with Reverend Bennett on voter registration. So at that time, to me, you're dealing with my frame of mind at that time, they all were working the same purpose. And the thing that I try to tell all these people, we did more coalition building and working with each other. Now there were fuss and fights, and people disagreed, and we would stay up sometimes to 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning arguing, but people made their point, and everybody had a chance to express their opinions and to defend why they had that opinion. And so, my sister and I went to Highlander Folk School. I dealt with the part that dealt with voter registration. She dealt with music. So she and Guy Carrowan, he was attracted to her. But while we were there, we were surrounded by the Ku Klux Klan that were burning crosses and buildings. They came in there and knocked out all the lights, and they took out Septa McLaughlin while Miles Horton to jail. But it was a very scary situation, very dangerous. And my sister started singing, "We Are Not Afraid." And she's credited with of, beginning that verse with "We Shall Overcome, we are not afraid." And so Guy Carrowan, asked her to come to Carnegie Hall. They were raising money for the movement. And so she and a group that she formed called the Montgomery Gospel Trio, you can look up, and a group called the Nashville Quartet that consisted of Bernard Lafayette, Jim Bevel, and others. They made an album, "We Shall Overcome." So then we began to be connected with different young people from around the country. And so Bevel at that time was in Atlanta, and so I naturally became interested in what they were doing. And Devil and Diane went from SCLC to SNCC, or SNCC to SCLC, whatever. So that was kind of what we did there. I think we all agreed on what we were going to do. I think the disagreement came on how we would accomplish it. And just as today, the older people, now let me tell you this, being part of the student movement in Atlanta, the old people told us to go home. They said, "You're not coming in here sopping our gravy." And I'm not going to call the names of people. You'd be shocked at who they were. But just as today, and I tell my older friends, do you remember you at 18 and 19? Do you remember what we did? So these things are cyclical, and they come in different forms. The difference today is there are less coalition buildings. It's me and mine, and this is my project, and you know. We need to find something that we all agree that we can do and go about achieving one thing. And then you can go to the next thing. And that's kind of how we operated. Yes, when I worked in the Carter White House, and part of when he made a trip to Atlanta, and he had a meeting at the Ebenezer Church. And I was responsible for gathering people from around the South to attend the meeting. And so just everybody who was anybody. And Mrs. King was at the meeting. And she said that she was so impressed about the number of people that I had brought there that she wanted me to help her with mobilizing people to come down for the first anniversary of the Martin Luther King holiday, first celebration. Oh, I was responsible for mobilization, getting as many people as I could to become involved with that, and that was across the nation, really. And so we held meetings across the nation, and we had committees set up in Atlanta, and those committees were also did reach the way we always did things. So so that was it. But I had a lot of help. But I had the responsibility of working with all of the people, the labor unions, the sororities, the elected officials. civil rights group and so forth. Labor unions had always been a part of this thing we call the movement. As you may recall, Brad Rustin was here, um, and he was close to A. Philip Randolph, and then support and a lot of the funds for what we were doing came from labor unions. Well, there was a lot going on in the country at that time, and Dorothy Height felt like we needed to pull our people together, uh, and we called it the family. And so she called for a meeting on the National Mall to bring people from across the country to there and a family reunion. I guess one of the popular songs at that time was by the OJ's Family Reunion, and that was our theme. So we did everything. We contacted the grocery stores, and so we put it on the grocery bags to come to that, and it was fun. Um, and so she continued that. And so she had it in Washington at first, and it was such a success that she began to take it around the country. I thought that, well, started the celebration of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. They were not doing anything around here. And so I accompanied Mrs. King to Selma for the Jubilee. And they treated her so badly until I said, well, Mrs. King, we don't have to come to this. We have something to celebrate. So that was the occasion of the 40th anniversary of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. And so we held that. And in doing that, I said to myself that maybe we're doing organization, and I'll start with young people 12 to 18 because I started when I was 12. And so if we can engage people at 12, we can get them involved at an early age that would help them to understand and maybe become more involved in impacting their lives and their education in particular. Um, so we started the Southern Youth Leadership Development Institute, and its aim is to cultivate and motivate students to become active in the community and active in issues that impact their education. So that's what we do. And we have a 6 week, usually a 6 week program. We're expanding this year program that deals with their health, um, the uh, financial literacy, uh, coding, all of that. We also help them to um, better be able to deal with their ACT and those tests, um, and communication. Um, we find that a lot of students around here cannot look you in the eye and will not open their mouth and talk to you. So they go through that elevator pitch exercise. And Reverend Courtney Meadows, that I pulled in when he was 12, um, became the student leader and is now the program director for that. And when we had him in school at St. James, he went through debate. He was part of the debate team. So he actually engages them with debates. So we come down here to the county commission, and they sit in the chairs and they talk about issues. Same thing with the um, state capitol and the city council. We also take them to Washington, D.C. We took them to the Supreme Court, and they also meet with certain senators and the like and Congress and talk to them. And we also have some lobbyists talk to them about uh, the progress of a bill, how it becomes a bill, and all that. I think the thing that I want to come to end with is that I like to I want us to get back around the table again. We used to talk at the table and iron out differences in the family and in the community. And I think part of what might be part of us coming to some kind of solution to what's going on today is that if we talk to each other, we can get back around the table again. And I urge that, and I urge that we do it with people that don't necessarily agree with us. We had, if you look at the King, we had people from the Ku Klux Klan to talk, and we began to talk with each other. And so today, we're so polarized, and then we talk about hating people. So the thing is, love conquers, not hate. And let's get back around the table again.